You're listening to If Only I Were Wiser podcast, where Raina Wilson brings together wisdom and raw life stories to provide encouragement and truth. So many times it's easy to become discouraged in your own pursuit of health because your story or circumstances look drastically different from your favorite influencer or even the expectations you had for yourself. If that is you, welcome. This space is for you to learn, breathe, and maybe just listen and see what wellness could look like for you. Hey friends, welcome back to the If Only I Were Wiser podcast. On today's episode, I have certified holistic nutritionist and women's health expert Nicole Bendayan. She is the founder of the digital education platform, the Sync Society Academy, and co-founder of Sync Supplements. In this episode, we talk about all things birth control, how to support your body nutritionally over the course of your cycle, periods, and pooping, and it's just a juicy convo. You won't want to miss it, so let's dive in. Wow, friends, super excited for this episode. I have Nicole Bendayan, and this has just been like a long time coming, and I'm so pumped because this is going to be like a juicy conversation. Women's hormones are always juicy. It's a topic nobody wants to talk about. So, Nicole, could you just start by sharing a little bit about who you are, what's going on with life right now? You've had a major life change, all the things.
Yes, thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited to get into our conversation. So, I am a certified holistic nutritionist and women's health expert. I focus mainly on the menstrual cycle and hormonal health. I'm also a certified FEM teacher, so I can teach fertility awareness method, and that is a way to avoid pregnancy without the need of hormonal birth control. And truthfully, that's where my story really started. I was on hormonal birth control for about 10 years and I had a lot of negative symptoms and was a little bit gaslit by my medical professionals. You know, I was experiencing all these symptoms. They told me that it was in my head, that there was nothing that they could figure out. And I went off of birth control. All those symptoms went away, started doing a lot of research, and that kind of has led me to where I am now. But aside from that, I just had a major move and actually moved to Spain, Valencia.
Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's honestly been incredible. You know, I'm still getting my bearings, but if there was anywhere to get bearings, it would be here, you know, by the beach. And it's honestly incredible.
Yeah. What led you to the move? Was it, do you have family there? Like, you're like, why not?
Yeah, kind of. I'm a Spanish citizen, but I don't know how to speak Spanish.
No way.
That's it's always weighed very heavily on me.
Okay.
So, you know, after COVID, and thankfully I was able to start this business during COVID, and it's all remote and online, so I can really work from anywhere. And I thought it was just a really good time to finally learn how to speak Spanish. And then, you know, hopefully that transitions into my practice as well. And I'm able to help more people and Spanish speakers and kind of go from there.
Yeah, that's crazy. That's awesome. I totally feel that. My son is almost 2, and my grandpa's from Nicaragua and my grandma has family in Mexico. So like my grandma spoke to us in Spanish growing up, but beyond that, we had nothing. And that was like one thing my dad was always like, you should have learned Spanish. And I'm like, you and mom were fluent. You should have taught us how to do this. So I feel that because I'm like I studied Spanish in college, and now I'm like currently relearning Spanish so like I can teach my son Spanish.
I love that. It's such a good skill to have. And honestly, it can change so many lives. And, you know, why not? You know?
And like you said, to be able to provide access, just like a wider range of access to Spanish speaking people, like, why not? That's incredible.
Yeah, I think it's like the 3rd most spoken language in the world. So it's definitely useful.
Yeah, how fun. Well, let's go ahead and dive in. You shared a little bit about your birth control journey, which I always think is just so fascinating. So is that kind of what pushed you into like research to begin with to kind of build a foundation for your business? Or what was like your grassroots, this is what people need?
Yeah, you know, I started with nutrition. I started with nutrition a long time ago. I had a lot of disordered eating habits and was obsessed with nutrition for many years. And then I actually lived in Vietnam for a while, and I started a nutritional,
No way.
I started a nutritional food product business there. And I was like, although I know all of this stuff, it would be great to have a formal education and just spread that out a little bit. So I ended up starting my certifications to become a holistic nutritionist. And, then I went back to Toronto, where I'm originally from, and was working as nutrition and culinary director of a startup. And that's kind of when I started to transition off of birth control. And it kind of was this huge kind of slap in the face, truthfully, because I started to do research about the birth controls that I was on and found all of these symptoms. And that was a spark. But then I kept going into reproductive health. And that was the first time that I had heard that there's 4 phases to my menstrual cycle. And it was so shocking to me, because here I am thinking that I'm, this well-educated, I love food and nutrition, I'm obsessed with biohacking and all of these different things.
Right.
And I didn't even know that there was 4 phases to my cycle, let alone that it impacts you every day, that these hormones needed to be supported differently at different times. So I started doing more research into reproductive health and kind of connected the dots of, the education that I was going through about, hormones and how they impact you. And then I was like, wait, if my hormones are fluctuating in this pattern each month, then don't they need to be supported differently? What's the reasons why we may feel differently at different times? And it kind of just all spiraled from there, personally. And then I started to tailor my lifestyle, nutrition, fitness, etc., to my own cycle. And then started talking to other women in my circles, and they knew absolutely nothing as well. And the job that I was in was pretty toxic. So I kind of took the plunge and was like, you know what, this needs to be shared. And it kind of just kept going from there. And I'm honestly so grateful for how it's gone, because, it's kind of gone above me. And, it's gotten to this level of, hey, this is such an important topic that so many women feel that they're kept in silence about, that they're dismissed about or invalidated about. And, it's gotten to the point that I'm just like, okay, this really needs to be shared as much as possible. And this education needs to be general knowledge, because, half the population is having or has had a menstrual cycle, and it impacts us daily. And if we know how to really live in tune with it, we can use it and actually leverage it to optimize our life.
Yeah, I had a brief conversation with one of our previous guests for season 1 who does like cyclical fitness, which was like mind blowing, right?
Yeah.
But I told her, like, I didn't know that I couldn't get pregnant like the entire time.
Yep.
It's actually like a 1 to 2 day window, like if that. And that was like mind blowing for me.
Yeah.
And then I'd love to just dive into the birth control conversation, because I had similar symptoms, similar story coming off birth control. I knew that like I remember being in a neuropsychology class my senior year of college, and for no fault of his own, but he was basically like, did you know birth control like changes your brain chemistry? Like if you want to have consent in your biological brain chemistry changing, like then you probably should like get off of that. Or like, like he was just like to a class full of women, in their master's program. So that was like so interesting for me. And again, probably not the best, but cold turkey, I like stopped taking birth control. Definitely thinking back now to like everything that I was, who I was when I was on the pill and afterwards was just so fascinating, because then I dove into Dr. Hill, Sarah Hill's Your Brain on Birth Control book. I don't know if you've seen that. Awesome resource, because she was actually a professor at the school that I was in, and she was
cool.
running I was in one of her studies that I was like, okay, well, like if you're on the pill, cycling naturally versus like not on the pill, whatever. And, I remember taking this study where it was like what women perceive as more sexually desirable compared to the women that are not cycling naturally. So I remember like clicking through pictures of like men with like facial hair, not facial hair, and like coming in through like different parts of my cycle. Mind blowing.
That's
all
so
in
cool.
for that.
I'm geeking out.
I know.
I wish I could be part of that study.
It was, I wish I had known then what I know now, because
Mm-hmm.
first of all, like, she's a professor at the college I was at, and I was like in the research lab down the, around the hall from her. So like now I found fangirl about like the research that she was doing. But one of her book was like the first step for me to be like, wait a minute, not only does like your brain chemistry change, but like when you're on the pill, it's not just a symptomatic solution,
Mm-hmm.
which is when I went in to see my like gynecologist what I thought it was. Because no, like your hormones that you're taking now affect all of the rest of the hormones in your body,
Mm-hmm.
which I just thought was like mind blowing, because we take supplements with such, at least for me at that time, I was like, oh, well, this is just going to fix my acne. So why don't I take birth control? It'll release the pain in my periods, relieve some of the pain. But nope, it does everything else. So I'd love for you just to share like your experience with birth control and some of those things that we mentioned, like your brain chemistry changing. What does consent actually look like?
Yeah, and I think that is I love this whole consent conversation too. And what I want to preface this with saying is I believe that birth control, we should have clear access to birth control, especially with what's
Oh,
going
for
on in the
sure.
States. I think that access to birth control is necessary, but informed consent is also necessary. And I don't think we're given informed consent. And we're also not provided with any other resources. I've talked to so many other women who have any sort of hormonal issue, and the only option they're given is birth control. And they're not told that diet, lifestyle, certain herbal supplements, all of these different things can very much manage your symptoms, if not completely heal you. And, when we're just given this Band-Aid solution that then causes us so many other issues, it's really such a downfall. And my experience with birth control, I didn't really have any negative symptoms from my period. I went on it because, I was a sexually active person and wanted to be protected. Didn't know that I could only get pregnant 6 days of the month. It's really only a
Right.
24-hour period, but 6 days because of how long sperm can survive within the body. But it was shocking to me that I was never told that, birth control depletes certain nutrients, and that nutrient deficiencies can cause additional symptoms, or that it can alter your gut microbiome, or that it does change your brain chemistry and change who you're attracted to, and all of these different aspects, that it's a group 1 carcinogen also was never told. And it's also like, depending on what type of birth control you're on, the duration of time that you're on it can impact those carcinogenic effects differently. So I was on it for almost 10 years, which is really the high threshold.
Same. Yeah.
And it wasn't at 2 years or at 5 years that I was ever told like, hey, yeah, it can prevent certain types of cancers, but it can also increase your risks of other types of cancers significantly,
Right.
And so it was this whole process of I feel like I was denied informed consent and denied being an active participant in my healthcare, let alone, so I had probably started experiencing negative symptoms that I can remember and attribute to birth control when I was probably 3 or 4 years in. And it was after several years of all of these negative symptoms, and I can get into them. Some of them are TMI, but one of the worst ones that was just like, how could you not tell me this was related, was I bled after sex every single time for like over 2 years. It was, and I went to multiple doctors and they were like, maybe your boyfriend's just well endowed. And I was like, I don't think that's the issue.
Thanks,
but,
though.
and they had tested me for all of these other things. And I had even asked, like, could it have anything to do with birth control? No, you're fine. And then, when I was living in Vietnam and I started to become a lot more connected to my body and started to care a lot more about how I felt versus just how I looked. And that kind of got me more into those natural roots. And I was really natural. Like, I would never take Tylenol or Advil or anything else, but I was on synthetic hormones since I was 16. And, I had this recurring thought that I don't know myself without synthetic hormones. I've been on these hormones since pretty much I've had them. Like I probably went on birth
Yeah.
control a year or two after I started my period. So since I've had these hormones and had a cycle, I've been on synthetic hormones and have had a synthetic cycle. And I just kept thinking about how I don't know myself without these hormones. And, you know, I suffered with depression, anxiety, and a lot of mental and emotional symptoms. And then my gut health was a total disaster. And, you know, I went off of birth control and somehow a lot of these symptoms went away. And it was interesting because I actually changed. I was on NuvaRing for, I think, 8 years. And then I went onto the IUD when I moved to Vietnam. And just that. So I was on NuvaRing, which is estrogen and progestin. And then I went on to, I think it was Marina, that was just progestin. And even that transition, I saw so many differences. It was wild. Like my body composition changed, where I stored fat, where I stored muscle changed, and my hair did a 180. And if you guys know the curl ratings, I went from a 2B to a 3C. So that's like 4 or 5 higher levels of curls. And
no way.
It was so shocking to me. And then so that was just getting rid of the synthetic estrogen. But then once I got rid of the progesterone or the progestin as well, I saw a whole bunch of other changes. And it was really just this like wild thing to go through internally, and then also to feel so denied and dismissed about it, because even my last appointment with my doctor, I was like, yeah, I want to get the IUD taken out. I think it's giving me anxiety and a couple other symptoms. She's like, no, it's not. It's local. And I'm like,
what? Sis, that's not how hormones work.
It's not how biology happens. But, and luckily I stuck to my guns, because there was a few times that I wanted to stop taking birth control, and I was told by doctors that it didn't do anything and like just stay on it. It's irresponsible not to be on it. And but this time I stuck to my guns, and that's really when that huge transition happened, and it's kind of just all spun from there.
Yeah. Can you give like a basic example of just like explaining birth control? You know, like we'll dive into the 2 phases of your cycle. But I don't think like I realized, aside from like brain chemistry, that what it means to cycle naturally and not cycle naturally. Like you said, like you were synthetically cycling and going through all of these hormones. So can you just like explain for somebody that's like, oh, I didn't realize this is what birth control does, like at the most basic sense?
Yeah. So first, it's important to know, which I didn't know and a lot of other people don't know, is that the bleed that you experience on birth control is actually a withdrawal bleed, and it's not a true period. So in order for you to have a true menstrual cycle and to have a period, you need to ovulate. But what was happening on the pill is that most pills, especially the ones that contain estrogen, are monophasic, meaning it's one phase. So you're having pretty much the same hormone dosage flowing through your body throughout the 21 days, and then you take it out and you have a withdrawal bleed. So it doesn't work exactly like this, but if you think about it in the perspective of, it kind of tricks your body into believing it's just ovulated. So it has similar hormonal levels to what's happening in your luteal phase. And a lot of people say it like tricks your body into thinking it's pregnant. It's not exactly it, but it's giving these hormones of that one phase so that your body doesn't ovulate. And what that does as well is it severs the connection between your brain and your ovaries. Because in a natural cycle, you have hormones in your brain, your pituitary gland, and hormones in your ovaries that are constantly communicating. And it's a constant feedback loop of, okay, so when hormones reach this level, this one has to be released. And it's a whole feedback loop that is giving you a natural cycle. But when you're on synthetic hormones, that connection is severed because your ovaries aren't producing these hormones. So your brain doesn't need to produce the other hormones that trigger different events in your cycle. So To put it simply, it's kind of just like you're in one phase of your cycle, and that's the phase that you're tricking your body into not ovulating. And it is different if you have the most common type of birth control is estrogen and progestin. So that one, it suppresses ovulation completely and you're not ovulating. Progestin only, so the IUD and then some pills as well, etc. That's just progestin. And what that will do is it will suppress ovulation, but not consistently. And then it will also thin the lining of your uterus so that the lining of your uterus isn't growing and you wouldn't be able to sustain a pregnancy had an egg been fertilized.
Yeah. Wow. That's super fascinating. Let's go ahead and dive into what your cycle even looks like.
Sure.
Basics. Let's go.
Okay, cool. Let's do it. So your cycle is from the first day of your full bleed to the first day of your next full bleed. So that's one full cycle. And you start off in your menstrual phase, or as we all know and love it, our period. And that's when we're actually bleeding. And this should be between 3 and 7 days. Anything above or below that is starting to signify that something is up in the body. It needs attention. And the menstrual phase is when your hormones are at their lowest and your endometrium is shedding. Then as you enter into your follicular phase, so the next phase is when these follicles they're pretty much sacs that house the eggs in your ovaries. So a few of them start to develop, but only one will continue to develop throughout the rest of your follicular phase. And this dominant follicle, as it's developing, it's releasing estrogen. So this estrogen is, yes, it's having an effect on your uterus. It's making your endometrium, which is the lining of your uterus, grow, but it also has a lot of other effects in the body. So it affects your neurotransmitters in your brain. There's actually been studies that show that your brain changes in mass and volume. Certain parts of your brain change in mass and volume, depending on what phase you're in, which is absolutely wild to me. But it also impacts your joints and ligaments. It impacts your skin and your hair. And, there's so many other effects. And then once that egg reaches maturity, another hormone is released that will help to rupture the follicle so that the egg is actually released. And that one event is actually the peak event in your cycle, and that's ovulation. So for phase thinking purposes, when we discuss our 4 phases, your ovulatory phase is those few days in and around ovulation. So a few days before and a few days after ovulation is considered your ovulatory phase. And then once that egg is released, it actually only can survive for about 12 to 24 hours. And then it just disintegrates and you're no longer fertile. So once the egg is released and you ovulate, your hormones can actually fluctuate between 30 and 50% near ovulation. So really, this is the peak event in your cycle. And then after ovulation, the follicle that once housed the egg turns into what's called the corpus luteum, and that begins to produce progesterone. And progesterone will be produced for the remainder of your cycle. Unless, the egg is fertilized, in which case progesterone will continue to be released. But if it's not fertilized, then all of your hormones will drop and you'll start a new cycle. But it's really important to note as well that progesterone has a lot of balancing effects to estrogen. So estrogen is this really powerful hormone, and then progesterone is this really powerful hormone as well that really helps to balance the effects of estrogen in the body. And you really need both in order to have good general health. And the only way that your body is going to be able to produce enough progesterone is if you do ovulate. Okay. So it's really important that you're actually ovulating, and that's how you're getting a true cycle. That's how you're getting those true, really healthy hormonal cycles.
So where does estrogen dominance come into this conversation? Because that would, in theory, be for women that are cycling naturally, not on the pill.
Yeah, so estrogen dominance is really interesting.
And then that's a really broad term. Yeah. But it's something definitely that more people are talking about in terms of symptoms that
Mhm.
lead to some sort of hormonal imbalance,
Yeah.
usually because of something that they're not seeing other places in their cycle.
Yeah, so estrogen dominance is really impacted. The two major ways is that you have too much xenoestrogens, which are synthetic estrogens that we can absorb through our environment, pesticides, what we eat, synthetic fragrances can really disrupt our hormones. And a lot of these are very inflammatory types of estrogen. And then the other type of estrogen dominance is when you don't have enough progesterone. So if your body's not making enough progesterone. So it's unopposed estrogen. And it does have so many impacts, and it does affect so many women. And you'll see it a lot in how you experience PMS. So a lot of PMS symptoms, there's actually 5 different types of PMS that are each kind of caused by different things.
Wow.
Yeah, it's insane.
Yeah.
We can get into that if you want, or on another
Yeah, totally.
episode. But a lot of women will see really negative PMS symptoms like anxiety, or a lot of water retention and weight gain, tender breasts, swollen feet, etc. And that's often seen because of estrogen dominance. So you can have quite a few different symptoms and issues that come along with estrogen dominance, but a telltale way is those PMS symptoms that really get you.
Wow, that's super fascinating. Yeah, we'll have to dive into that. But let's kind of start with the breakdown of, I think, some of the things that I think I was like first drawn to your account was like, I knew, like, I'm certified nutritionist, and I've looked at hormones personally of like, this is just so fascinating because nobody told me this, right? And I should probably know this about my own body. But was the fact that you can nutritionally support your body throughout your cycle.
Yeah.
So would you say that like your nutrition changes specifically over each of the 4 phases, or is it a progression? Would you look at it more holistically in terms of like follicular versus luteal? Let's just dive into like, how would we hormonally even start, like 2 to 3 tangible ways to nutritionally support our body throughout our cycle?
Yeah, I love to look at nutrition in this add, avoid, and supplement kind of view.
Okay.
Because I don't like restriction. So instead, I'm like,
Right.
if you add in these certain things, that can also really help you. And of course, depending on your level of any issues that are going on in your body, yes, you may need a more stringent and intense nutritional protocol for 3 to 6 months. But just adding in certain things for each phase can be so impactful. And I do prefer to break it down into the 4 phases. And I can kind of go over them and say the main kind of focus. Obviously, there's a lot more that goes into this, but kind of just the basics is, in your menstrual phase, you're losing blood, and you may be losing about 2 milligrams of iron per day. And
Wow.
yeah, and iron deficiencies are rampant, especially for women. So this can lead to a lot of fatigue and headaches and a lot of other negative symptoms that we associate just with our periods, but it could really be because of these nutrient deficiencies and specifically minerals that are leaving your body. So this is a great time to really focus on remineralizing and getting a lot more minerals, especially iron. And when you're consuming iron, it's really beneficial if you avoid caffeine and alcohol, as that can limit the absorption, and then increase vitamin C, as that can really up the absorption. And then when you go into your follicular phase, it's important to support estrogen, but it's important to support estrogen regulation. So it's important to support the production of estrogen, but also the metabolism and elimination of estrogen as well, so that we're not getting that estrogen dominance in the luteal phase. So eating things like broccoli, cauliflower, all these cruciferous vegetables can really help with estrogen metabolism. And then incorporating phytoestrogens, which are plant-based estrogenic molecules, compounds that can actually, they've gotten such a bad rap. Like soy and tofu has gotten such a bad rap because it's like, oh, it mimics estrogen. But it's actually been shown that phytoestrogens actually help to regulate estrogen in the body. So these are really different than xenoestrogens that are found because of the industrialized process. So
Right.
parabens, synthetic fragrances, phthalates, aluminum cans contain, those kinds of things you do want to avoid because those are inflammatory, but phytoestrogens can actually be really beneficial for you. And then as we get into our ovulatory phase, so those 2 or 3 days before and after ovulation, like I said previously, your hormones can fluctuate between 30 and 50% during that time. So that's a real big rush of hormones. So you really want to help to still support estrogen metabolism, but then also to really support your liver, because that's the way that all of these hormones are getting metabolized and flushed out. So making sure that you're focused on your elimination system too, that you're eating anti-inflammatory things like turmeric and ginger and stuff like that can really help with it, and supporting your liver and making sure that you're pooping, because that is how you're actually eliminating this estrogen.
Right.
I know we don't like to talk about poop, but it's so
important.
So make sure that you're going regularly. And then as you approach into your luteal phase, especially the beginning of your luteal phase, you really want to promote progesterone production. So vitamin E and zinc can really help with that. And then as you're entering into your later luteal phase, this is when a lot of people will start to feel those PMS symptoms. And depending on what specific type of PMS you have, you can even tailor it deeper. But consuming things that have like mood boosting amino acids are some of my favorite, because in your luteal phase, as these hormones are dropping, your serotonin levels, your dopamine levels are also affected. So if you're able to consume more of these mood boosting amino acids like L-tryptophan and L-tyrosine, that can really help to mitigate a lot of the emotional motivation symptoms.
Yeah, the stressy and depressy.
Stressy and depressy. Yeah. Those can really help. And then also there's a lot of teas that you can do cyclically that can really help if you experience painful periods. Raspberry leaf tea is a game changer.
So maybe these will be two different sections, but how would you support your body with the changes in pregnancy? Knowing that's like, maybe that's a whole other conversation because your hormones are like completely wrecked. And then postpartum, because that's a whole other different flood of emotions as your body is coming back to regulation.
Yeah, pregnancy and postpartum, they're not really my main focus of study yet. I feel like when I decide to become pregnant, you'll start to see a lot more content.
Yeah.
But it is totally different because you're not going through that same cycle. So you're not having those different phases. You are now pregnant. Your body is producing certain levels of all these different hormones that are much greater and much higher. And you have all of these other things to incorporate into your nutrition plan and your health plan during those times. And then the same with postpartum, depending on if you're breastfeeding, how often you're breastfeeding, if, sometimes cycles will return pretty quickly, but if you're breastfeeding, the longer you breastfeed and the more that you breastfeed, the longer it will take for your cycle to return because your body doesn't want to get pregnant again while you're breastfeeding. Right. So it actually suppresses ovulation during that time. And then kind of once you reintegrate your cycle, then you can start with these tips that I've given as well once you come into a regular cycle. But because during pregnancy and postpartum you're not having this cycle, you got to focus on other kinds of nutrition.
Yeah. And I think that's just so fascinating because like I'm still breastfeeding our son, but my cycle returned I think 6 weeks postpartum. Horrible, really rough because your first period postpartum sucks.
Does it? I can imagine.
Yeah, it was not fun, but it was just like so fascinating because even when I went back to my 6-week appointment and was like, hey, like these are some of my symptoms. I understand that hormonally I'm all over the place and I will be all over the place. Like, what can we do to support my body in the meantime? The response was dismissive,
Really?
And it was like, well, we can't even offer you a hormone panel until you're a year post breastfeeding. And I'm like,
really?
Well, So, but that's super fascinating because I've already tried to incorporate just some of like being intentional about my nutrition throughout my
Yeah.
cycle, along with like watching for other symptoms and markers over the course of my hormone change. But it's just like super fascinating to dive into
Yeah,
how your hormones change.
it's wild. I'm sure there's tons of really well versed and well educated postpartum and pregnancy nutritionists that can really help you out with that. And it is so interesting to, we go through all of these different, not just our menstrual cycle, but all these different cycles of life that impact our hormones differently. And as those cycles of life impact our hormones differently, those hormones impact our lives differently. And it's such a heavy weight to try to navigate that on your own and, not be provided with the resources and be dismissed, et cetera. And, I really hope that, for women who have a regular cycle or want to get back to a regular cycle, that I can be that support system for a lot of people. But you really have to find your tribe at all the different times in your life that like really do help support you.
Definitely. On that note, what encouragement would you give to women that are like stuck? Rather, I'm thinking back to 16-year-old me that even if I was in a place to hear it, what encouragement would you give to her that's like, hey, I'm experiencing these symptoms. I don't want to do birth control, or I don't feel at peace committing 8 years of my life to this pill. Like, what encouragement would you give to, I think, like your younger self, as well as maybe women that are like in their early 20s that like want to do life, but also don't feel like they have a choice outside of the pill?
Yeah, I always think about this story that my best friend has a sister that is 8 years younger than him. And way back when, I mean, she was just going through puberty at that time. And he came to me, he's like, Nick, she's going crazy. She's not herself. She's freaking out at everything. Like, I don't know what's going on. And I turned to him and I'm like, she doesn't know what's going on. So you're definitely not going to know what's going on. And,
Right.
That's such a core memory for me. And I wish that I could go back to that moment and be like, hey, actually, like, let me talk to her. Because for me, I think education is the most important thing. And
Definitely.
really, truly understanding situations. And, when I first started my practice, I was doing mostly one-on-ones and focused on how someone was in their current situation. And that's great, but I felt like I wasn't able to give them the amount of resources and knowledge that they'd be able to handle any kind of situation that they'd go into. So that's really why I pivoted into digital education and courses and programs, because education, when you know it, you can start to, see these symptoms happening a lot faster and see how it correlates with something else that's going on in your life, and then be able to actually tend to it and know what to do and have a resource to look back at any point in time. Because a lot of people don't recognize or realize that everything really is interconnected. So if you lose your job, or if you can't sleep because there's construction going on outside for 3 months straight, how that can directly affect your hormonal cycle and your menstrual cycle, and then how that can have further implications. So when we do have that knowledge, then we're able to recognize things faster, really deal with them, have resources to go to, and then also be active participants in our healthcare. And that is really what I strive to do, is teaching people how to be active participants in their healthcare. And a lot of that does come back to education, because there's been so many times that I've been sat at the doctor and I'm like, I feel this way. I don't know why. Can you run tests? And they're like, no, you have this, that, and the other. Here's a prescription for it. And, I remember one time I was sick for like a straight year, and I couldn't hold anything down. I was really ill, but had gained 20 pounds. And I was just like, what is going on? Went to my doctor 4 times in a summer, and she would just tap my stomach and then write me a prescription for something for gastritis that I knew would destroy my liver. And that was it. And I didn't take it. And then 3 months later, got out of a really bad housing situation, broke up with my ex, and went on vacation for 3 weeks to visit my cousin. And after those 3 weeks, I was perfectly fine. A year of sickness. And then it was stress manifesting in my body to that degree. And that was the first time I recognized how stress could manifest in my body. And it was just like, if I knew that, I wouldn't have had to suffer for as long as I did. And the lows don't have to be as low, and you don't have to stay in those lows as long. And I'm not saying, there's times that I don't have great periods but I know why. I know what has caused me that pain, and I know that I wasn't treating myself well. But the thing is, I know why, and I know how to make the next one better if I so choose to.
Right.
And that's really being an active participant in your health and making sure that you feel confident at the doctor's office, and that you feel confident in your health, and that you feel confident taking what you're taking and feel like you have informed consent.
Mm-hmm. And I think it goes back to like the conversation of exactly like you mentioned, it's education to know, to go into your doctor's office confident, to be able to ask for things, and then like make the decisions off the education that you have to be able to fight for what you need. It's not getting dismissed. It's saying like, okay, but actually like, if I know that estrogen is a role in this conversation, or, like I went to the doctor a couple months ago for similar, like, abdominal distress, mood, anxiety. Again, a lot of that is chalked up to, well, you're still postpartum. Well, you're still breastfeeding. And I'm like, well, it's been over a year. I shouldn't feel like crap anymore. So I went to my doctor. I'm like, hey, like, let's run a full thyroid panel. I understand like my T3 and T4 can be off, like I'm not a genius, like I'm not an expert in these fields by any means, but I've done enough personal education to like be confident going into my doctor's office. And after a roundabout conversation, my labs came back, again, not the full panels that I had asked for, because that's a whole other conversation. But he was like, well, Raina, it looks like, are you stressed? And I was like, my husband's in the Army. I have a toddler at home. Yes, I'm stressed, and I understand like how stress manifests in the body, but like here are all of the other symptoms that like are pointing to the fact that like my cycle is irregular. I'm starting my cycle like way too early, which I know that is like a stress marker. Basically laid everything out. And his response was, well, I think based on your like postpartum depression like score sheet, you have depression and anxiety, so I can write you a pill for Cymbalta and you can go to counseling. I like called my husband after that appointment, and I think this goes back to like the education. Like I'm thankful for the education that I've had to be able to not beat myself up in that moment, and I don't think a lot of other women like have that privilege to be able to know like this isn't my fault. I think that's like one thing, to know that like you're not making all these symptoms up. Like there's a biological response to not being prepared to take care of your own female body.
Totally. And with everything else going on.
Yeah. And come to find out, 2 weeks later, we found mold in our home. So they're moving us out of our house next week. And I like looked at my husband and I was like, you felt like crap. I felt like crap since we've moved into this house. I wonder why.
Wow.
So our detox story is definitely going to be a whole other thing, but they're moving us out of our house next week. And literally my husband and I, when we found out that day, like we were standing in our kitchen and was like, at least now like we can do our own personal work to heal, because I think that's what it came down to, is like we weren't confident enough to like go in with these things, but at the same time like there is this level of like I can only do so much in my doctor's office because I can't advocate anymore for myself.
Yeah, I'm so sorry you went through that. That is a lot. That's a lot. But also, thank God you found out that you do have mold, because if you were just to stay there, it doesn't matter what you're going to do personally or how much counseling you're going to get. Like, it's not going to be fixed. And it's massive, because, you know, you also have to take into consideration all these different aspects of our lives, like the products that we use, the house that we live in, the sheets, the, you know, what we're washing our clothes with, and how that can really impact our health. And I find a lot of kind of not traditional, opposite, conventional healthcare professionals, like the typical Western healthcare professionals, they don't go through all of those different things. They don't ask you if you're microwaving every meal that you're having in plastic Tupperware, or, you know, if you have mold in your house, or if you are
you spraying Febreze every time you, like, I don't know, have guests over? Like, do you have candles? Like, is your water clean? Like, that's a whole other thing. But
and it's not to say I don't, you know, I have these conversations a lot. And I do also want to say that I don't think it's with malice that these healthcare professionals aren't giving you the care. But when you really consider it, you have 3 to 7 minutes with this doctor for what you've been experiencing for the last year. And not just that, they are only able to provide you with the resources that they've gained themselves. And there's this wild stat that in the States, to become a medical doctor, there's a recommended 25 hours of nutritional training throughout your whole program, which is one course in one semester. And it's something like less than half of the schools meet that recommendation. And I think it's like 14% don't even hit like bare minimum. And when you really think about what that means, is that food is your fuel. Food is what your body is running off of. So we have these healthcare professionals that we need them. Oh, we need them bad. Keep them all there. Like, thank you for everything that you do. But it's reactive healthcare. It's, you have a symptom. I'm going to give you something that will make that symptom not as bad, or make that symptom go away. Maybe I'll give you a lot of other symptoms, but my job right now is to focus on that one symptom that you have and make that go away. So here's a bunch of birth control. You know, it's not proactive. It's not focused on longevity. It's focused on, you know, clearing up a symptom, healing a wound, repairing a bone. You know, we do need these doctors for a lot of things, but when it comes to our day-to-day health, it really is up to us to make sure that we're living in a lifestyle that is actually benefiting our health. And, you know, if you at least know what you can do, and that was a really big thing for me as well with education, is I could tell you what to do and you'll do it for 3 to 6 months. But then after that, if you don't know why you're doing it, you're just going to be like, whatever, I'm off of it. You know, but if you truly know that, oh, I'm going to eat flax seeds during my follicular phase because this helps with estrogen regulation and will make my PMS symptoms less bad. Okay, yeah, sure, I'll throw some mulled chia seed or flax seeds into my smoothie. Right. You know, at least you know, and then you can make those informed decisions. And then it's you taking action. And I'm not saying you need to take action all the time. I'm not, you know, there's no judgment. Like, I know it a lot. If I get into a really depressive state, a lot of my things go sideways. I stay up too late and I don't work out and I don't eat as good as I can, but at least I know that I can come back to something, and I know what I need to do to make sure that I'm feeling good.
Absolutely. And I love how earlier you said that you focus on like nutrition and adding things in. I would love to dive into the supplement conversation, because I know you're a little biased, but I would love to hear about your supplements. But you also mentioned like teas. So where would you even start in the supplement conversation in order to support your body throughout the course of your cycle?
Yeah, I think supplements, I can give you my general recommendation of most supplements that most people need.
Yeah.
And then beyond that, it's really focused on what do you as a specific human need.
Yeah. This is a super nuanced conversation. We're
Yeah.
making that disclaimer,
Of course. And, when you look at it, majority of, I think it's like over 50% of the US population is deficient in magnesium. And magnesium has a huge, huge impact on your body. It has over 300 metabolic reactions. And so magnesium is one thing that I would just say take consistently, and it's so beneficial for your health. Take an Epsom salt bath. If you have painful periods, take an Epsom salt bath. That's magnesium that can be absorbed through the skin, and it can be really beneficial. I also love to look at supplements, especially herbal supplements. And I'm co-founder of Synced Supplements, and we have a balance supplement as well as a focus supplement. So our balance supplement, of course, talk to healthcare professionals before you take any sort of supplement and do your research and all of that. But it can really help support those with PCOS and PMS and those transitioning off of birth control. And then we also have our focus supplement, which the focus supplement I just love to talk about because it's my supplement. Like it's I wanted it for myself, so I made it. And it helps a lot with feeling alert and focused. It helps with motivation. And it also has a lot of adaptogens, and adaptogens are really where I started my supplement journey because I became obsessed with adaptogens. And if you've never heard of adaptogens, they are compounds that help your body deal with stress better. And some of them have different effects, but they really, I think a lot of us don't recognize that stress is actually a physical response in the body. It's a hormonal response. Cortisol is our stress hormone, and we have epinephrine and norepinephrine. And so stress is an actual biological thing that's happening in your body. It's not just in your head.
Yeah. And with physical manifestations.
And it impacts everything. It impacts your microbiome. It impacts your brain. It impacts inflammation, everything. Okay. And so what the focus supplement is it's a bunch of adaptogens, medicinal mushrooms. So it's lion's mane, cordyceps, rhodiola rosea, which is also great for energy. And it has a couple amino acids in it. So I think it's tyrosine and glutamine, and as well as American ginseng, which can also help with feeling really alert. And kind of how I love to describe it is you can, like, for me, it's I'm working, and then 2 or 3 hours later, I'm like, I feel so on point right now. Why do I feel so great? And then I remember that I took it, and I'm like, oh, okay. So it's not like, caffeine, sure, it helps you with focus and helps you with energy in some capacity, but then you're getting the jitters and the crash, and this doesn't do that, which is so incredible. And like lion's mane mushroom, I love medicinal mushrooms. Lion's mane mushroom is so good for your brain health. It's actually been shown to reduce the risk of Alzheimer's. It helps with memory. And especially if we're talking about in phase syncing and supporting different aspects of your menstrual cycle, during your luteal phase, especially your later luteal phase, you don't have as much motivation because you don't have as much dopamine going on. You don't have as much serotonin getting triggered and like loving life and all that kind of stuff. So these adaptogens can really help in that time. And it's actually really interesting too. ADHD gets worse in your luteal phase, and ADHD medication doesn't work as well in your luteal phase. So take that into consideration during your next cycle. Yeah. Which is, it's so interesting to think about. And I think just having that knowledge really gives us the ability to give ourselves grace. And to, before I was so hard on myself when, I was in my luteal phase and I couldn't focus and I didn't feel good. And, I wasn't really the best in my relationships and all of the rest of it. And then I'd feel so guilty about it. And that guilt would carry on. And into even phases that I felt better.
Right.
Or I wouldn't have confidence in myself because I couldn't trust myself to be stable all the time. And at least when we know our patterns and we're able to track our patterns and we know where we're at in our cycles, not only can we give ourselves more grace because we understand that, hey, maybe my thought isn't my reality and these hormones are affecting me in this certain way, but then we can also turn to things that can help us, like adaptogens, like the focus supplement, like increasing our sleep, getting to bed earlier, all of these different things that we're able to really help support us.
Definitely. I chatted with a friend and we were talking about like a study that had shared a little bit about the perception of beauty or like body satisfaction over the course of your cycle, and that just tanks in your luteal phase with all other markers like water weight, everything else controlled. Women perceive themselves to have higher body dissatisfaction with everything else controlled in the second half of their cycle. That has been, like you said, just the psychological reassurance to be like, okay, if I feel a little fugly right now, like
I heard
that's okay.
Exactly.
It's okay. Or like if I don't want to go to the gym because like, yeah, it's the week before my period or days before my period and all of my hormones are at rock bottom right now, like, girl, like I'm not going to beat myself up because I don't go to the gym,
Yeah, it's massive. I always tell this story, but I was in a relationship and, we were going through it. We were it was at a rough stage. Both of us were going through a lot in our personal lives and we were working through it. And for like 2-3 weeks, we were doing like really well. And like, I was doing really well in my perception of the relationship, etc. And then all of a sudden it hit me like a wave. And I'm like, it's over. This is tanking. This is bull. This is whatever. And I was writing in my journal. And then I was like, wait a second. I flipped back 30 days and was the exact same sentence not written in my journal 30 days prior.
Stop.
And I was like, it's because I'm in my luteal phase. Hey, okay, maybe I don't have to call him and freak out that our relationship is ending, etc. Because it's my perception of it. And it's such an empowering feeling to be like, hey, my thoughts might not actually be my reality right now. Let's give it a day. Like, let's give it a few days and see what happens, And it's so interesting when we're able to recognize that in ourselves and the psychological benefits of all of those different things of just being like, oh, it's, first of all, that study that you just talked about is insane, but also makes much sense. And it's interesting that you said even in the controlled of, like a lot of the time I will get a little bit puffier and I'll have more water retention before my period. And it's like, I used to look in the mirror and sit there for an hour and a half berating myself.
Pick everything apart.
And then not eat for, or like munch on things, which then caused me to binge eat because then I had, I wasn't giving myself enough calories. And in your luteal phase, your metabolism actually speeds up and you need more calories in your luteal phase. But I was eating a lot less because I felt negative towards myself. And then that spun into even worse PMS symptoms. And it's just this like, why didn't I know this? Like my life would have been so much easier. And I'll end it off with, the average woman will have 451 menstrual cycles in their life spanning 38.5 years. So if we actually think about that, how monumental it is that we're actually experiencing these hormonal fluctuations every single day for that long. And not only when we are equipped with the knowledge of our cycle and how it impacts us and how we can support ourselves, can we make those 451 cycles better? But it's also when we look at such a massive aspect of our lives through a negative lens, no matter what kind of self-development, healing, etc. that you're doing, if you hate your period and you think it's a burden and you are terrified because next week I know that I'm going into my PMS stage and life is going to suck and all these other things, we're looking at such a massive part of ourselves through such a negative lens. But when we flip that and actually understand that we can use it to our advantage and leverage each phase of our cycle and know our strengths during each phase of our cycle, like, the empowerment is exponential. Like, it's so cool. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this has just been such a fun conversation, and there's so much more I would love to unpack. But maybe we'll just have to have another whole other episode because this is awesome.
I'm into it. I love talking.
This was great. Can you, as we wrap up, share about where our community can connect with you, like your courses that you offer, all of your plugs?
Amazing. Thank you. I love plugging. So you can follow me on Instagram and TikTok. It's at Nicole.Bendayan. And I run the Sync Society Academy, and we have courses. Just the Get Synced course is incredible because it teaches you all about your cycle and how you can live in tune with it. And then we also have our Ditch Birth Control strategy for getting off of birth control, as well as PCOS and endometriosis focus courses. And I am also starting up fertility awareness method workshops. So it's the fundamentals of FAM. I'm so excited. So it's a 3-part workshop, and we have some VIPs that you can increase to be a VIP, and really excited to launch those. And I have a couple other things under my belt as well, but you can find all of that at thesyncSociety.com or my link tree in any of my bios. And if you're interested in the supplements, it's getsynced.com.
Cool. Yeah, and I'll link all of those just to make it easy. We'll have all of those fun details in the show notes. So one final question as we wrap up with all of our guests, because I know that you've already shared a wealth of wisdom. This has been such a fun conversation. But if you could provide any wisdom to your younger self or our community that is listening, what would you share?
My big theme recently that I've struggled with for a majority of my life is slow down. Like, just take a second, slow down. You know, I think a lot of us feel really overwhelmed, and, you know, sometimes I can be really overwhelming in how I speak about a lot of these things, but in kind of any aspect of your life. I love this analogy of when you look at the whole staircase, the top floor seems really, really high. And it seems really overwhelming. You don't want to climb that staircase. But if you just look at the next step, it's so much more doable. So slow down and actually take the smaller steps, because you don't want to give up before you even start. And I think a lot of us, especially as women trying to prove ourselves in a much more like male dominant world, in a really fast paced world, we're not beings that are meant to go full throttle all the time. So take a step, slow down, do your thing, and look at the sky and look at the moon, because the moon's always there for you.
Yeah. Breathe a little. Like, we were created with a biological, like, pause button, like, phase. And I think that has given me so much grace to be like, no, if my body was like programmed to like chill out for a little bit on a monthly basis, then like I have to provide space for that. So Nicole, this has been such a fun convo. I love this.
Thank you. I love talking to you.
This has been so fun. Well, I will connect all of your things, and I just appreciate you in this conversation, and we will catch you guys in the next episode.
Thank you.
This episode of If Only I Were Wiser has ended, but be sure to subscribe for more episodes so you don't miss any encouragement. And don't forget to rate and review, so we can continue to build our community and share more about topics that will be healing and helpful for you. See you in the next episode.